In order for a doctor to give you a diagnosis, he needs to find where the inflammation is in your gut. Now, first you come to the doctor and you have all sorts of symptoms, and they run a blood test to see if your inflammation markers are high. And once they do that and they are high, they're like, okay, we're going to do some poking around. So the first thing that they like to do is do a colonoscopy where they put a camera up your butt and they look around your colon. And usually they can get the camera right about here and they can stick it a little bit up into your ileum, the last part of the small intestine. And, mine was so inflamed, it was shut. They couldn't get the camera through here. It was so inflamed. For me, they found inflammation here, and that could be diagnosed as sigmoiditis or colitis or ulcerative colitis. So colitis is just inflammation of the colon. And if it's ulcerative, if they see ulcers, they call it ulcerative colitis. If all of the colon is inflamed, they call it pancolitis. And all they need to do is a colonoscopy and they will see what's going on there. Another thing they will do is a biopsy. And this is where they take a tissue sample and they look at the tissue under a microscope and they run cultures to see if it's infected or, to see how deep into the tissue the inflammation is operating. So that's colitis. It's pretty straightforward. There's also another term called diverticulitis, where the inflammation and the damage is so bad that little pockets start to form. But essentially, it's just a more advanced form of colitis. They could also do a proctoscope, which, I think they can do that, almost at a doctor's appointment very quickly, where they stick almost not a microscope, but like a telescope up your butt, and they can see, up to here, and they can see if you have hemorrhoids, perianal fistula, which is what I had, or anal fissures. Sometimes you don't even need a doctor to look at you to know if you have a hemorrhoid or an anal fissure or a perianal fistula. But fistulas, they can be all over the place and have lots of channels. And sometimes the doctor will order an MRI to get a better idea of, what these fistulas are doing. So somebody normally gets diagnosed with Crohn's disease when they find inflammation here at the last part of the small intestine. So really quick, this is the stomach. This is the duodenum, the duodenum, and it got its name because it means it's like 12 widths finger long. This is the duodenum, and this is the ileum and the colon. So the definition for Crohn's disease is inflammation anywhere from mouth to butthole, but they really don't use the definition. It's a little wishy-washy. And the discoverer of Crohn's disease, Dr. Burrell Crohn's, he wanted to call it regional ileitis, which meant patches of inflammation in the ileum, the last part of the small intestine. And that's kind of how they use the term now. They use it all over the place, but usually somebody gets diagnosed with Crohn's disease when they find inflammation here, which can be tricky because you can't stick a camera there. So they normally do this with MRIs. I guess you can do it with an X-ray. They did it with an X-ray for a long time before MRIs were available. But my favorite diagnosis tool that they don't seem to utilize very much is a capsule endoscopy. And this is where you swallow this camera and it goes throughout all of your digestive system and takes pictures so it can see where the inflammation is. I think that's the best way to get a diagnosis because, you need to get a clear picture of, the whole entire, like it's so easy to hide a condition in here because it's, behind closed doors. Mostly, you don't hear doctors talk about things going on in the duodenum. A lot of people will have duodenal ulcers. The ulcers, So the funny thing about stomach ulcers is they're not found in the big part of the stomach right here. They're only found up here and in the duodenum, and most of them are actually like right here. Most of them are here. And a lot of the times you can tell from the burning pain that they create that you have ulcers. But they stick a camera down here, they do an endoscopy, they stick a camera down here, and they look around and they see if you have ulcers. And they can also take a sample of the tissue to see how big the ulcers are, how bad the inflammation is, and they can do cultures to see if you have H. pylori. The problem with a lot of these testing procedures, 1 month you could feel great, the other month you could feel really bad. You go to the doctor, and it's going to take them 2 to 3 months to schedule you in to do these appointments. And by the time you get tested, this could heal or it could not heal. It depends on what the root cause of the disease is doing. So for a long time, I thought it was caused by diets. And so for a long time, I thought it was caused by diets. But Dr. Burrell Crohn's, so for a long time, I thought it was caused by diets. But it turns out doctors of old knew it was caused by conflict shock, stressful situations that catch us off guard. My gut issues started after a breakup in high school and in college. Those were like my two biggest flares. And when I started noticing, the stressful things in my life that were putting my gut in and out of overdrive, that's when I really started to get better. I have a webinar that talks about this in much more detail. And I show you everything I did to get better. So somebody gets diagnosed with IBS when somebody has symptoms, but they do all these tests and they don't find inflammation anywhere. Leaky gut is another term that's almost as dumb as Crohn's disease. It doesn't really tell us anything, and it doesn't help us get better at all because it's not what's really going on. Our brain is putting our gut in and out of overdrive. There's not stuff leaking into our system and causing random symptoms. It makes no sense for a toxin to leak out of the body, cause a rash on my right arm, and then my left arm is fine, and this part of my body's fine, and that part of my body's fine. It literally makes no sense. But when Dr. Hammer looked at someone's brain CT scan, if somebody had a rash on their right arm, there would be a ring in their brain in the same location every single time. If somebody had colitis, there would be a ring in their brainstem. It looks like that. Colitis rings here in the brainstem every single time. If somebody had Crohn's, there'd be a ring here or here every single time. And he mapped out every single disease in the body. He could just look at your brain CT scan and know what was wrong with you. That's like the ultimate way to get diagnosed, but most doctors will think you're crazy if you order a CT scan on your brain to self-diagnose yourself.